fair and natural, we allow the state governors and indeed the state government to borrow from the pension fund of in our kitty. Indeed, if we don't do that, how do we develop? And where will the monies be kept? As of today, Kingsley, we are facing a situation where a number of the pension fund administrators are sitting on huge sums of money. There are no outlet for them to invest this money so that these monies can turn around. Much of these monies are in banks as fixed deposit. Is that what we set out to do? I think we need to be a little nationalistic.
All right, Shuaibu Idris, you've raised a number of points. Yes. We're going to come back to you to clarify those points. But Jumai,
yes.
You know, we have Tanimu. Well, we have Tanimu in the studio here with us, and Serap, whom I introduced, is also with us now via Zoom. That's Mr. Kolawole Oluwadare, who is Deputy Director of Socio-Economic Rights and Accountability Projects, Serap, joining us via Zoom from some location in Lagos. While your Zoom is good, I think we better take advantage of it, Jumai. So I want to ask the same original question I posed earlier, namely the concern about state governments seeking to borrow from the pension funds. Is it a storm in a teacup or a genuine concern about some existential threat to the rights of pensioners to draw upon their pensions when the time comes?
Thank you very much. It's a genuine concern. And the various reactions that have trailed these announcements by stakeholders and citizens lends credence to this fact. Now, there are legal frameworks that speaks against this. There is a morality of it also, and there is the antecedent aspect of the issues of this borrowing, or what has been called investment, for use of a better word and a language semantics of these pension funds. We can look at the legal framework first, which is the Pension Reform Act 2014, which regulates pension and the use of such funds. And the Pension Reform Act is very clear as to how pension funds are to be used or even invested. And that is clearly stated in Section 85 and Section 86 of the Pension Reform Act 2014. And to show you how important this is, even the pension fund administrators are regulated strictly under a strict legal regimen by the National Pension Commission, which is the body that administers the act. And Section 86 is clear that, yes, state governors, the federal government and local government in Nigeria can invest, take part in investment of pension funds by way of bonds, bills, and securities. But there are other legal frameworks that guide that kind of investment, or what can be called borrowing. And that is, we can look at the Fiscal Responsibility Act, for instance, which states clearly what federal government or state government should do before any borrowing is done, whether locally or internationally. And we've not seen that. And that clearly speaks against any kind of borrowing or investment from the Pension Act. And to show how important this is also, Section 100 of the Pension Reform Act criminalizes any misuse or any kind of misappropriation or misapplication of pension funds. And again, we must have this at the back of our minds, that pension funds are essentially securities for those who are working in the future, who comprise both of the public and private sector. Now, we can look at the moral obligations of the governors, as Mr. Tako had said earlier, who have not participated in this contribution. And I disagree that we can divorce their not participating.
Yes.
We apologize. There's a freeze now. Do you mind?
Yeah, it's sort of freezing. We'll get back to him when it clears. And we'll now come back to the studio where Tanimu Ahmed Esquire is waiting. You know, investment. There's been a lot of bailouts from government since this administration came into office to pay salary. And we're talking about investing our pension, you know, into the federal government infrastructure. Okay, after investing this money, where does the interest go to?
That's a very beautiful question. If you look at what is at stake, I quite agree with you. At the commencement of this current administration, more than 27 states we are unable to meet their financial obligations to commercial banks. The federal government had to resort into taking over those loans facilities by giving out bonds to the commercial banks so that the state governments, about 27 of them, can be free to now perform the various activities they are meant to. So it is a call for concern that a lot of these states that are clamoring, they lack the capacity in actual sense. They cannot, because you cannot just assess funding in terms of because it's available. There are certain criteria that must be fulfilled. The fiscal, as you mentioned, the Fiscal Responsibility Act is there. These monies, what the law intends and seek to achieve, the Pension Act itself, is it wants the investment to be protected. So the PFAs are even restricted. You cannot just invest in any type of company. It must be an A-list company. Then for the federal government and the state government, the conditions are there, and those conditions are meant to protect the investors. The truth of the matter is, even banks, they are desirous of having good investment. An investment is good when you are certain of the returns, not only the profit, that the money that you are invested will be, you are sure that the money is coming back.
With interest?
With interest, the interests are usually low, but the most important factor is that you are sure that when you need your money, the monies will be available. Over time, government has been the most secured source of investment through bonds, bills, promissory notes, and the rest. You look at it that for the funds to be judicially used, the government is the most important player. That's where the pension fund can invest their money and be sure that they will get their money as at when it is required. Having said that, we are all equally not oblivious that there's a trust issue with what is happening. We have seen so many states that are unable to meet their financial obligations. Even with the federal government intervention, they still divide other means to still access borrowing from banks. Thereby, at times, you have so many banks, some of them have been sanctioned, I'm aware of. They use other means, they get the ministries, some parastatals, they go under to still access loans from commercial banks at a very, very exorbitant rate. Ordinarily, we shouldn't have issues with state government wanting to invest, because if you look at it, the thin line of demarcation between borrowing and investment, if you want to bring it down to a layman's perspective, it means the same thing. If you are investing, because you are equally borrowing, because you are taking monies from a particular place and putting it into creating infrastructure, health infrastructure, creating roads, boosting the economy, with the hope that when the economy improves, you have surpluses, you have resources to meet your obligation. And mind you, it's a long-term investment, 7 years, 10 years. So the expectation is that within those years, you'll be able to improve the economy of your state. You will now be able to have an amount that you can fall back to. And we don't just give or you don't just invest. There are certain terms and conditions that goes with it in terms of the risk profiling. You have to look at the viability of the state. You have to look at the projection. You have to consider so many factors before you invest in such kind of investment.
All right, Tanemo, thank you very much. I would like to return to Shuaibu Idris in our Kaduna Network Center. But Shuaibu, you were talking about the capacity of states to borrow and also the desirability of allowing them to borrow from the huge pension funds under the control of the administrators, since the federal government is already doing that. I'm sure that you will recall that in the current republic, which is a little over 20 years now, we've had a record of state governments going to the capital market to issue bonds. And as Tanemo was also reminding us here, we have also seen state governments going to commercial banks to borrow at exorbitant interest rates. Just by way of casual analysis, if you like, what has been the performance of the state governments with the funds that they borrowed either from commercial banks or the bonds that they raised? Has our national condition improved on account of the borrowing? In other words, have they been good borrowers so that if this time around they come to say, look, we want to issue more bonds and borrow from the pension fund administrators, the pension fund administrators will say, yes, these are potential persons, who can manage these bonds very well, and therefore, at the end of the day, we'll have good returns on what we are issuing. What has been the record of state governments with their borrowing?
Kingsley, I would like to categorize the answer into two spectrums. There were times did not have a debt management office. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala was loaned to us by the World Bank to come and set up debt management office. A debt management office was set up in Nigeria, and it's been in operation for 15 years or a little longer. Debt management office has been setting some level of structure, guidelines, process, policies that prevent excessive borrowing to the extent where a state government can overborrow, if I may use the term. Because of that, I am aware, believe you me sincerely, about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I have been involved with a state government trying to borrow money, and the debt management office issued a not agreeable statement. Because of that, the state government could not borrow the money. Even when they went to the banks refused to borrow because you will need, a certificate of clearance from the debt management office. Now, prior to the introduction of the debt management office and the debt management mechanism in Nigeria, state governors were somewhat irresponsible borrowers. However, post that period, this process and the market and the system has been reasonably sanitized. Number two, generally, before a state government raise a bond or issue a bond will never be issued to fund recurrent expenditure. Bonds are issued for specific infrastructure development related projects. Now, most of these projects are income generating projects that the state government, even though they issue what we call ISPO, the irrevocable standing payment order, still this project generates money in addition to the IGR, the internally generated revenue, plus the federation account allocation to the state and local government. Again, with the income generated by the project, these funds are then be able to pay back the bond as and when it matures, and then service the the semi-annual interest payment. So you will agree with me that as at today, yes, there are quite a number of states that are technically insolvent. They are not able to meet their even recurrent expenditure without allocation from the center. If you listen to the chairman of the Governors Forum, Dr. Kayode Fayemi, he did say, should the state just exist to pay salaries? Wouldn't there be avenues to give back the dividend of democracy? Now, I again reiterate my earlier point. Should we allow state to just go to China or World Bank to borrow money when, in essence, what you are looking for in Sokoto is in Sokoto? We have funds lying near idle, and we will say because somebody is a bit paranoid, somebody is not so somehow as much educated or enlightened in the realm of the borrowing and the conditionalities associated with those borrowings, we say the state should not be allowed to borrow. I think it will not be proper. I believe sincerely that there are conditions, there are restrictions as espoused by Barrister Kolawole, where he quoted quite a number of the relevant sections of the Pension Act. I think those inhibitions will protect irresponsible borrowing, and I don't see any state issuing an ISPO against a bond that, say, a PFA will invest in and then the state will refuse to pay. Even when the state refuses to pay, the center, the Accountant General of the Federation, will automatically allow such debit to go into the state's account and the monies will be refunded. So no PFA, no pensioner will lose his or her money arising from a PFA investing in a state government bond.
Mr. Shaibu, I kind of take that with a pinch of salt because in most cases now in Nigeria, most people who retire don't go home smiling with their money. It takes quite a long time to access this money. And if state governments really wanted to borrow from such funds, why has it taken them so long to key into the pension fund from their states?
Understand the point. You have to segregate the issues. Contribution as distinct from borrowing or issuing bonds for people to borrow. I did give an analogy that the fact that I don't have money or I am not a bank depositor, will that prevent me from borrowing from a bank? I will approach a bank today. If I decide to go to Zenith Bank, I may not even be a customer of Zenith Bank. I can approach Zenith Bank and say, I have this project. If Zenith Bank sees that project to be good enough, Zenith Bank will give me the money. They will not ask me, oh, you are not my customer, oh, you have not deposited money, therefore I can't borrow you money. Zenith Bank will listen to me and they will borrow me money if they believe in my project. Number two, the point you are making that some people are retiring without smiling home. Ask yourself, did their employer participated in the contributory pension scheme that we have? Or did even the employee agree to participate? We are aware of quite a number of employees that decided not to participate. I know of a friend who worked with a company in UK and he refused to participate in the contributory pension, and at the retirement he couldn't smile home with anything. I was in the service of a company, I retired, and at the time of my exit, my pension fund administrator asked me, how much do you want? The law is clear. I'm allowed, even at the age of 50 and above, to get certain percentage of my funds. So you must be careful. Even if you want to take the comment with a pinch of salt, you must be careful. What are we talking about? Did I contribute? Did my employer remit the money? If yes, then why wouldn't I smile home on my retirement? I think you should do your research carefully. I don't want to mention names of institutions, but for want of better example, you can say, for example, a staff of Central Bank retiring. Will a staff of Central Bank tell me he or she retires without smiling home with good retirement benefit? Certainly no. I know a friend who has over 250 million naira in his retirement savings account today, arising from contribution by his employer. So let's distinguish the issues into two. We are discussing how do we allow state governors to fund infrastructure. And I made a statement. This country requires close to about $3 trillion to be able to develop. Now, who will give us $3 trillion? Obviously, no one will give us. So if we have some savings, and within the same economy, we have the surplus end, and there is a deficit end. So the deficit end that has good project, why wouldn't the surplus end fund the deficit end? Please, gentlemen and ladies, let's look at this issue with some level of nationalism and with some level of knowledge of investment and when to invest and to turn resources into something.
All right, Shaibu Idris, thank you very much there for your explanation, but I think that as you probably would get to learn, there are still gaps to explain. I'll bring in the other guests, but first, we're talking about infrastructure deficit. Then the question to ask would be, what kind of infrastructure do we actually have in mind? Or what kind of infrastructure are the state governments presenting on the basis of which they are either issuing bonds or debentures or otherwise? Second point, you've used the bankers analogy and the contribution. You said that you don't have to be a depositor in a bank before you approach the bank for a facility. But of course, from your experience, you do know that if you are approaching a bank for a facility, that project or that facility must be for a bankable project. In other words, the facility must, once utilized, be able to repay itself, and the bank, of course, also has its interest. And more essentially, there is the issue of securitization, which is where you come up with collateral. So what is the collateral that the state governments have, except to say that they are mini sovereigns and therefore you can always have recourse to whatever funds they have with the federation account, or whatever funds that may accrue to them by way of IGR and so on and so forth. As I said, you've made very valid points, but we'll still need to explain some of these issues for the benefit of our viewers. A while ago, Oluwadare Kolawole popped up again on our screen. We understand we've lost him, but let's return to Ivor Tako. Ivor Tako, of course, a former board member of the National Pension Commission, is listening to the explanations and the comments by the other guests. Ivor, I would like you to respond to the issues on the table.
Thank you very much. Let me first say that the pension fund which we are discussing now, let's look back. In 2003, there was actually nothing like pension fund. There was really no pension industry. But the Pension Reform Act brought about the contributory pension scheme. Let me say that pension that brought about the fund we are talking to is a very strong pillar in social security. Social security is to protect peoples, especially workers who are members of those schemes. Pension fund is not only an economic fund, it has a social connotation. By the social connotation, I mean that the funds are first and foremost put together in order to take away workers from destitution in their retirement. And the law makes it specifically that employees are to contribute to the fund. Investment is a third leg to that. State governors, let me go at the risk of repetition to say that state governors have no moral justification to begin to eye pension fund when in the first place they are supposed to be part of the contribution. Those state governments don't have the interests of their workers' welfare when they become old. And that is the main reason why they are not contributing to the scheme. Some of them don't even have laws. The law that was universal application to all the states and federal government, Pension Act 1999, has been abrogated by the Pension Reform Act 2004, now replaced by Pension Reform Act 2014. Those states that don't have pension laws and don't have any contributory pension scheme, their workers are working in jeopardy. They have no protection in their old age. They are actually working towards destitution. That is the social aspect of pension funds. Now, it is still, and I repeat, immoral for any of such states to look at them. But then I want to say with all sense of responsibility that as a worker, I take serious exception from some of the words used by Mr. Schreiber. He said, workers who are kicking against the use of borrowing, let me use that word, borrowing of pension funds, are paranoid. I think I take exception to that word. And he said, people who are uneducated. I don't think that is the point. The point remains that those workers own the money. Even an uneducated person has a right to say, this is what I want my money to do for me. So to use those very strong words of paranoid and uneducated, no, it is not. It's a bit very strong and unacceptable to us as workers and to us as retirees who own those funds. Having said that, I want to say that pension funds are not for borrowing. The statement had been made very clearly. I don't want to go into that. People who go to the banks to borrow money, they do feasibility studies of what they want to do with the money they are borrowing. The bank sees it and then look at it. Is this a viable project that we can put this money in? If it is not, they won't grant the loan. And the body that has responsibility to look at whether the project the governors are bringing on board or any investor is bringing on board is the National Pensions Commission. The law empowers them to look at the instruments and if they meet with the guidelines they have given. But I want to say that for now, as we stand, even the guidelines of PENCOM for bonds, for state bonds and that is very clear. Any state government that has not keyed into the contributory pension fund, their state bonds cannot be invested in with pension fund. The PFAs have that understanding, and that is a rule. The law says that PENCOM has a right to bring out guidelines, and those guidelines are with every sense laws, because it is the law that empowered the guidelines to be put in place. So let me say that the pension fund as it stands today, pension funds are long-term investable funds. And the long-term investable funds are being invested in the economy for economic development. So by so saying, I want to say that pension funds are doing a lot in the development of the economy of this nation. And then secondly, pension funds are not idle funds. They are not lying idle there in any account. They are there, they are being invested. And instruments are there for which pension funds are being invested. And pension funds have been invested in infrastructure in this country. I think up to 5%, it may be minimal, it may be whatsoever, but it is those instruments that meet the requirements for approval that have gotten approval. What we are saying, there are two prongs of this. Governors and Mr. Shoaibu should tell them they should bring viable instruments for investment. If they meet with the guidelines, my brother, Mr. Shoaibu, they will get approval for investment that will develop the economy of this nation. Secondly, pension funds, like I said, has a social connotation. An employer who cannot contribute to the well-being of his employees when they are old, which is what is building the fund, has no moral right to look at that fund. And that is still there and it stands there. Thank you.
Mr. Barrister Ivotako, you've really broken down, the topic so that anybody who is not a financial illiterate will understand what you're trying to say. Well, back here to the studio, Tanimu Ahmed, the Nigerian Union of Pensioners is kicking, seriously kicking against borrowing from the pension fund, and they have, categorically said state governments should not tamper with the money. What does the law say?
As the other guests have stated clearly, the law itself, section 86 down to 89, is very clear. Pension funds are not, we don't want to go into semantics of borrowing investment. It's not like a bank you just walk up to, you bring a proposal, you are financed at an interest rate. No, it's an investment. It means the project is identifiable, it's verifiable, there's a time frame, and when those monies are deployed, it will be used for the purpose that it is meant for. You and I are complaining about the infrastructural deficit across board. We don't have good roads, we don't have good medical, we don't have hospitals, water. So the government needs funds to do those projects. The funds are not idle per se, but in the real sense, they've not been optimized, they've not been deployed where they can now get return on investment. For those that are kicking against it, their concerns are genuine. It's about the trust deficit between the citizenry and the government. Any policy the government wants to roll out, the citizens are naturally apprehensive because of the history of abuse by those in government that are supposed to marshal out this program. So the program itself will not have issues, but it's about the way and manner. If you look at, a lot of people do have genuine concern where they retire and they could not access their money, but it's not it's not based on the fact that the monies have been invested, they are not being repaid. No, most of the times you look at it, there are administrative bottlenecks, documentation. Those are the concerns. Not that the monies will just, because the projects will be verified. So it means at every point in time, you know what the money were used for, and at any point in time, most of those investments are income generating. It might not be direct. If you have good roads, for example, it means you are opening up the state. You are creating business activities. It means business people will pay tax, and from those tax, the government, the state government will get more in terms of personal income tax, where you pay salaries and the rest. So now you are now creating, it has a ripple effect. If you insist that you want to keep the money, you don't want the money to be invested, at the end, the monies will be eroded because of inflation. You have so many other considerations, but if you invest it wisely, and that is why the Act itself made mention of the kind of investment, mentioning the federal government, mentioning the state, and mentioning A-list companies. If you look at, the federal government will not allow any states, yes, they have that control, to just take monies and refuse to pay back. Already we've stated it, about 27 states are not that viable to assess the, so any state that want
That's
to...
That's a reality check, isn't it?
It's a reality check in the sense that when states have so much that they've borrowed from commercial banks and they were not paying as at when due, the federal government had to intervene by giving those commercial banks bonds and now take over those loans so that to free up the tightening effect of those loans over the years. But you see, we need to look at what led to the fact that state government borrowed so much, even from commercial banks that have the wherewithal to challenge them, and they were unable to pay. So these are the concerns that will be looked into before allowing anything. So the pensioners should not be apprehensive. They should not. That fear is natural, but there are remedies for the risk mitigants are there, and the administrators will naturally ensure that nobody is cheated, nobody is denied this.
Why are you sounding optimistic about this? You say that there are hedges, of course, against misuse of pension funds, but we have seen countries that have run into pension crisis.
Sure.
So, if you have a systemic crisis in the pension funds management system, in the pension management ecosystem, what happens? I mean, you're sounding, oh, they are there.
No, the fact
they will
is
guarantee that. They will guarantee that. And that's one leg of it. The other leg, before we go on this short break, when Shuaibu Idris was speaking, I did ask the question. We keep talking about infrastructure deficit, and I asked, look, what kind of infrastructure are we looking at? With the greatest respect to you, Tanimo, is it not probably just too linear to say, oh, they want to build roads. So if you now build the roads, you open up economic activities, and persons who have now become economic agents will earn revenue. When they earn revenue, they will pay taxes. And when you pay taxes, the government will now have more money, and it will be going on and on. I don't know. I'm not in the loop of these attempts to issue bonds or to get the funds managed by the PFAs. On Good Morning Nigeria, and indeed at other fora, you hear people discussing specific issues to say, look, in terms of agriculture, this is what we need in the value chain. I haven't seen that. I mean, I don't know, maybe you have seen. No, is there infrastructure? They say, hang on a second, you say infrastructure now, and you will hear about post-harvest losses arising from poor infrastructure connecting the farm to the market through the rural areas. It is only Federal Ministry of Agri that has a rural development component to it. Is this funds they want to borrow? Is it to open up the rural areas and then be sure that they can take their produce from the farm to the fork in the center, so that the post-harvest losses are minimized? Is it to establish cottage industries for value addition? We just sometimes hear infrastructure. Well, we're going to have to take a short break now, gentlemen. When we return, we'll continue with the conversation.
The counsel of our fathers.
I believe we have fought one civil war too many in this country. So those who experience it will run away from it.
Nigerian youths, let's build our nation together.
My name is Nando Jamda
Mohammed.
Stedita
Hussein Musa.
Rodina Joel Finji.
Said Musa. John.
I'm a carpenter. I've been doing this for more than 8 years now.
And I said that plantain. Na kai kimamin shekara uku.
I've been selling my tomatoes for about 10 years now, and I do it for a better Nigeria.
Ina wannan sana'ar lemu ne domin Najeriya ta ci gaba.
Ina sa domin Najeriya ta kyau.
And you can see how we're doing our small little work to make Nigeria great.
As you can see, I'm a technician and I'm doing it to help myself and to help my generation.
Ina zaune ne a Plateau na business. Kuma ina yin wannan domin ci gaban ƙasar Najeriya.
For a better Nigeria. This message is from the National Orientation Agency.
Una don't hear say them they rape about 35% of them girl picking, and even them women safe. Some of them they even die in the process. Emotional trauma uncle, they make some of them be like say they not dead this what again. They don't go, but they live like ghosts. Some of them shame don't kuku make them go kill themselves. It no good though. This no be our culture. It no fit be the African way. Why we can't allow this kind of thing join body with us so they loud where. If you know they fear law where man put, you know they fear Baba God there. You self, you where they cover mouth so you see mini wanna they happen. You know what here when the Oyibo talk say problem where they bring come out. They solve and sharply. Remember, person where feel rape. If it's a key person, if it be you, if it be your pikin, if it be person them where you love well. So make we learn to carry women then, like diamond where we be. No grief for rape.
Dialogue, empathy, love, and unity. These are vital components of nation building.
For all to be well, we appeal that we should refrain from volatile, provocative, inciting messages and language.
Let's build and not destroy.
All right, still good morning, Nigeria, and we're having a very interesting conversation. We have a number of tweets that have come in from our viewers. Juma and I will go through those tweets and then return to our guests. Leo Fadaka. The welfare of pensioners is sacrosanct and must not be compromised in any guise, even in a recession. Let state governors cut the cost of governance and look elsewhere for loans if necessary. Tampering with pension funds is counterproductive in the Nigerian system.
And Abdul Mimino Aminu A tweets, most state governments are not contributing to the PFA, so why do they want to reap where they did not sow?
Honeybee says, good morning, Nigeria. The borrowing is too much. What is the repayment plan? Or will it be our children that will be made to pay? A wise father leaves riches for his children, not debts.
Mutana Farouk tweets, cutting the cost of governance at all levels will help to generate the funds for infrastructural development. Insistent borrowing from the right to the left may plug the country economy into an irrevocable insolvency. The contributors must be prompted to pull out of the scheme.
Yunusa Idris, allowing state governors to borrow 2 trillion naira from pension funds is pure injustice to Nigerian workers. The governors that cannot pay worker salaries?
Daily Jack Solomon tweets, various countries of the world, such as Chile and South Africa, funded their infrastructure growth by borrowing money from workers' pension funds. They are able to do that with honesty, accountability, and surveillance in focus. But in the Nigerian context, implementation is always a problem.
Usman Banu Kantu, now this seems a good business for the pension managers and governors, whereas detrimental to the pensioners. This implies that pensioners have to wait longer than expected to get their pension paid, because repayment could be a big challenge which would throw pensioners into untold hardship.
And Chris Simon tweets, state governments are collecting monthly allocations, security votes, taxes, revenues, and other benefits from the federal. What are states doing with this money? Pension funds should be made to serve the purpose of what it is meant to be.
Festus Akimboyewa, the alternative is for government to increase taxes, which will not be popular and can be terrible for our economy. Government should instead borrow from financial institutions like insurance companies and banks, including the CBN.
And Law Alpha C is saying states should have the strategy to think out of the box to increase their internal revenue in order to meet up with expenditure framework, which is increasing by the day, and forget about borrowing from pension because most of them will not pay back.
Bello Muhammad, there is no harm in states borrowing from pension funds as long as the money borrowed will be applied for infrastructural purposes and judiciously. Proper evaluation of infrastructural projects must be enforced to avoid mismanagement. Well, again, the question of infrastructure, there's some vague reference to infrastructure. Well, Shuaibu Idris, I want to return to you. Of course, there have been a number of counter punches from the other guests with regard to your position, just to indicate that you are often one of our very polite guests, as our guests usually are, so you didn't mean any insult to them, but of course you have the opportunity of responding. But let me ask this question once again. When we say infrastructure, what kind of infrastructure are we talking about? I gave the example before we went on that short break on agriculture, for instance, how to minimize post-harvest losses, if that is a target, how to add value to agricultural produce, that's another one. I think Tanimu was mentioning water project. But that's a tricky one, because have we got right the economics of water? How much revenue can state governments collect from water distribution? Because one of the major challenges we face with urban water supply in Nigeria today has to do with reticulation by state governments. The federal government already provides bulk water without the kind of borrowing that we are seeing now. And yet, state governments cannot get the water to the last mile and then let persons have it. But even if they did that, how much can they raise? Because we haven't got our economics of water right just yet. And then you ask yourself, aren't there other kinds of businesses that state governments may wish to be interested in and issue bonds? I'll give you one example. I'm not in the financial services sector, as you very well know. Look, refined petroleum products in country is a huge challenge for us. Everyone is saying, oh, when Dangote refinery is built, is constructed and up and running, we'll have some mitigation in that respect. All 4 refineries owned otherwise by the NNPC at the moment are in a state of coma. What is the challenge with pension funds being invested, for instance, in refineries, whether in modular refineries established by state governments for which bonds are issued or otherwise, rather than just talking about infrastructure, and infrastructure? Shuaibu.
Before I answer your loaded questions, let me most sincerely apologize to Barrister Tako if he takes offense in the choice of the words I made, paranoid or educated. No insults were intended. It's just to clarify the position that people should be knowledgeable on the field they speak. So I hope viewers and listeners and those who may have taken offense will forgive me, but no insult is intended. You've asked quite a number of questions. One, you did ask, concluding my earlier presentation, what is the security by the state government? The security for any borrowing from state government is usually an ISPO, that is irrevocable standing payment instruction or order. That means whatever money the state government is making or will be getting from the center, before the money gets to the state, the loan the state has taken will be taken out of that allocation and then repay the money. So technically, there is a bit of comfort by anybody lending money to any state. Barrister Tenimu did allude to the fact that some state government defaulted from the banks or to the banks. If you look at the AMCON assets that were taken over, to the best of my knowledge and belief, and I have been in the system prior to even the setting up of AMCON, there was no loan from any state government that was taken over by AMCON. What does that mean? It meant even when the state government defaulted in the payment as and when due, subsequently the state did work up to pay. We had 27 state governments that came to the center to seek for a bailout. Why was there bailout? We had a situation where a country that is dependent on single commodity called oil, the price of oil went down and the federation account allocation went down by nearly 50%, and therefore the cost of governance could not be reduced, and the state government became insolvent and they had to run to the center. Where are we today? Oil is now priced at $50. Will it continue? Your guess is as good as mine. However, today the states are able to meet up the salaries that they need to be paying. Maybe, like quite a number of the tweets have said, there is need to reduce cost of governance. Fast forward, what are the infrastructures that need to be funded? Kingsley, please permit me to state categorically here that there has to be distinction between the kind of economic policy a government is pursuing and what we, the populace, want. We are running, if you like, a capitalistic economy, and we are aligned to the west of the center, which meant there are certain aspects of activities, economic activities, that are categorized as a no-go area to government. Do you expect a state government, a federal government, or a local government to, say, start tomato processing? Obviously, no, because we have said we should leave the business of government to government and the business of business to businessmen and women. So therefore, no matter what you want us to do, it is fairly, not within the realm of the ideological lineage of Nigeria today to allow government to get involved in some of those activities. You and I would love to see this economy develop. What are the infrastructures that you've been asking? What infrastructure? What infrastructure? Do we have sufficient healthcare systems in Nigeria today? Can we really say that average Nigerian has access to hospital? The answer is capital no, Kingsley. Do we have sufficient educational institutions? Even if we do, what is the quality? And if the quality is low, why is the quality low? Is it near absence of teachers? Is it the teaching equipment that are not there? So these are the infrastructures that state government can key into, the pension fund to be able to fund such infrastructure. The businesses you mentioned, for example, refinery, unfortunately, even if you want to do a modular refinery or a full-blown refinery, the Pension Act does not allow, the pension fund administrators to invest money in such kind of businesses except infrastructure. Kingsley, until just about 2-3 years ago, we never had an infrastructure fund in Nigeria. Today, we are proud to say we have about 2-3 infrastructure funds. And I made a categorical statement here that quite a number of the pension fund monies are near idle, because when you keep money in a bank in fixed deposit, it's near idle. How much is the bank paying? Today, savings account is less than 1%. Current account is only less than 2%. Even if you have a 30-day deposit or a 90-day deposit, how much is the interest? 5%. When you can invest such monies in infrastructural development and earn a return of near 15 or even higher percent, there is a fund I'm associated with. The fund is returning averagely 23% annual returns. And indeed, there are quite a number of PFAs that put money there. Now, when you have funds that is generating 23%, Mr. Tako's analogy of the social or safety net of the of contributory pension is then going to, then I can retire happily. Then the social aspect of it will then be met. If I contribute money and the money is going to be held by the PFA, and then it will sit down, the PFA will sit down on the money without investing it to be able to generate sufficient return, so that I can retire happily. Where and how will I retire happily? Do I want at the end of my 30 years of career to just collect the money I deposited in the, in the PFA? When the PFA needs to meet its own expenses, it has salaries to pay, it has rental income to rent to pay, it has electricity or utility bills to pay. So how much will I gain at the end of it? All I'm saying is, yes, there are issues. Yes, there may be challenges. But my knowledge of the system as at today, the Debt Management Office is apt and fencing up irresponsible borrowing by state. The Securities and Exchange Commission is apt, doing its own responsibility, making sure that no state government comes into the borrowing spectrum to borrow money just for recurrent expenditure. There has to be, like you said, either a feasibility study, in this case, a viable statement of where the monies are going to be invested. I think we are generally not differing in this discussion. Maybe in the presentation we may differ, but even Barrister Tako did agree that funds should be invested so that pensioners or retirees can then retire happily with better money, better income than what they have contributed. And even the SERAP or the pensioners, they will certainly be happy to be able to see the income that their funds are generating is sufficient enough to make them happier when they retire, rather than just to collect whatever you contributed without necessarily generating any income.
Shuaibu Idris, thanks a lot there for your contribution. I just wanted to clarify this, and perhaps Ivor Tako can also speak to it. When I use the example of, say, look, investing in the energy sector by way of refineries, whether a full-blown refinery or a modular refinery, I wasn't saying directly that the PFAs should invest, they should be the ones who now invest. If state governments are interested in infrastructure, I believe that we need energy infrastructure. And part of our energy infrastructure will include refineries, will also include pipelines. And that's the midstream sector, and could also involve the downstream, which is petroleum. I think that perhaps the argument has now been rested that government has no business in business. How do you keep generating revenue, generating income, other than using taxes and then exercising your borrowing powers? So if a state government, for instance, said, look, we are interested in the modular refinery, and some state governments have indeed indicated that interest, and I think one or two states are in the process of that, and you say, for instance, in the share structure, our state government will have 49%, private investors will have 51%, and then you decide to issue your bonds for the 49% or most of that 49%, and you go to a PFA. Of course, that's clearly, on the face of it, a bankable project. But I want to ask Ivor Tako, why are we not seeing the pension funds in big projects that are also revenue spinners? How much, for instance, of the pension funds are we seeing in infrastructure, such as the Second Niger Bridge, that is supposed to repay itself, or even in terms of refineries, as I've just cited?
Thank you. Let me say this, that first, I want to clear the issue of state government and investment. We are in this country and we know from years past up to now, one of the problems with state governments and investment is lack of continuity in government policies, especially at the state level. When a state government starts this project, sometimes even a road, which can be termed a social infrastructure, they start a road, another state government will come, and you see they will not even be paying the contractor to complete the road for one reason or the other. So any investor, not only pension fund holders, owners of pension fund, any investor will want to look at continuity in governance, which is unfortunately lacking at the state level. And that in itself is a problem for any investor, including we pensioners. Having said that, I want to say that the pension fund in RSA account, like I said earlier, are not guaranteed by the federal government nor any government agency. The only guarantee the funds have is how the regulator, the National Pensions Commission, regulates the industry, especially the risk profiling of the funds and the investment, and the supervision it gives to the operators in the industry. That is the only guarantee that the fund has. Having said that, it is for that reason that PENCOM, PENCOM and investment of pension fund has two prongs. The first is safety, and that is number one, safety of the fund and adequate return on the investment of the fund. If those two things are taken into consideration, I don't think that the owners of the fund, the retirees, the labor movement, and even PENCOM are at pension fund in any instrument that will develop the country. For us, there are also, and this is not what is here now, there are social infrastructures, which we believe that if pension funds go there, they are added advantage to the pensioner. If you develop hospitals, you develop roads that can bring food from market to the urban areas, food from farm to market, it will reduce the cost of food. If you do a lot of other ones like schools and the rest, you develop infrastructure, everything, social infrastructures that will impact positively on the life of the worker and the retiree. Why will the worker be against that? The main thing is continuity in governance, safety of the fund, and that safety comes through regulatory interventions, risk profiling, supervision of operators, and all the rest. When we talk of the refinery, I'm sure that if the proprietor of Dangote refinery had his instruments in order and went to pension fund will surely invest there. The regulations for investment that PENCOM puts in place are progressive, and they will continue to progress as investment gets better. As instruments come in, better instruments for investment come in. Pension regulations are not static on investment.
Well, Barrister Ivo Tako, thank you so much for that reality check. Former National Treasurer of the Nigerian Labour Congress and former board member, National Pension Commission, as well as a consultant on pension matters. We thank you so much for your time and contribution on Good Morning Nigeria today. And we also like to thank Kolawole Oluwadare, who we sort of lost via Zoom. He's the Deputy Director, Socio-Economic Rights and Accountability Project, SERAP. And Shaibu Idris, a financial analyst. It's always a pleasure to have your input. And Ahmed Abubakar Tanimu, Esquire, a former banker, now human rights activist and private legal practitioner. Thank you so much for your contribution on the topic today. Well, that's Good Morning Nigeria. Join us again tomorrow for another edition. I am Jumma Yusuf.
Remember, stay safe and be well. Corona is back. I'm Kingsley Osadolo.
This is NTA International.